I want you to close your eyes for a second if you can. Or, just imagine this. Picture the pitch-black ocean off the Kent coast of southeast England.
It's the dead of winter, right?
Exactly. It's February. The wind is just howling, whipping the sea into this terrifying, churning frenzy. And there's a sudden, heavy, freezing rain falling in sheets.
You probably couldn't see more than a few feet in front of your face.
Right. Now imagine you're standing on the deck of a wooden sailing ship in the middle of all this. But beneath your feet, below the deck, there is a completely different world.
It's like a totally insulated reality down there.
It really is. Below deck, there's warmth. There's the glow of lanterns swinging gently from the beams. There's an actual wedding party going on.
People are drinking spiced ale, they're laughing, violins are playing.
Yeah, it's this pure celebration of love,
Right.
completely insulated from the violent storm outside. But then, in an instant, that joy is just absolutely shattered.
With no warning whatsoever.
None. Just a sickening, deafening roar of solid oak splintering against an invisible wall of sand beneath the water. The hull rips violently open.
And the icy water doesn't just leak in, it explodes inward like a battering ram.
Exactly. In seconds, the music turns to screams, the lanterns are extinguished, and the freezing darkness just swallows everything.
It's just an unimaginable nightmare.
And you'd think the terror ends when the ship hits the bottom. But for the Lady Lovibond, the wreck of 1748 was really just the beginning of a 250-year loop.
Which is why we are descending into this specific maritime nightmare today. We're looking at this as a psychological thriller and a historical investigation.
We are. We're tracking a cursed voyage, a story of really deep, rotting betrayal, and a phantom ship that allegedly returns to its watery grave every 50 years.
The juxtaposition of that opening scene is, the ultimate horror scenario. You have the absolute peak of human happiness instantly colliding with the most violent death imaginable.
Right, going from a wedding toast to drowning in freezing water in seconds.
Yeah, but what elevates this from just a tragedy to a true psychological thriller is the mechanism of the disaster. This wasn't an accident of nature.
It wasn't a bad storm overwhelming them.
No, and it wasn't an innocent navigational error either. It was calculated murder. We are looking at a story that forces us to examine human monsters just as closely as supernatural ones.
So our mission today is to reconstruct this fatal voyage. We need to examine the chilling eyewitness accounts of its ghostly return, and finally investigate the cold, hard facts behind the legend.
Right, we have to look at the historical context, the psychological terror, and the actual documentation.
I want you, listening right now, to hold on to that image of being trapped in that dark, freezing hull. Imagine the claustrophobia.
The water rising to your chest, the ship tipping onto its side.
Yeah, and you have absolutely no idea what just happened. The most terrifying part is that you are completely unaware that the person who sealed your fate was supposed to be your protector.
He deliberately steered you into a graveyard.
Exactly. To understand how a celebration devolved into mass murder, we have to go back to the beginning, February 13th, 1748.
We need to look closely at the man in charge, Captain Simon Reed.
Right. Who was this guy?
Well, some historical accounts actually record his name as Simon Peel, but he's most commonly known as Captain Reed. He is the master of a beautiful, pristine, three-masted schooner.
The Lady Lovibond.
Yes. And to understand the pride he must have felt, you have to realize what a three-masted schooner represented in the mid-18th century.
It wasn't just some lumbering cargo galleon, right?
Not at all. Schooners were rigged for speed and maneuverability. They were like the sports cars of the ocean, sleek, fast, and requiring a highly skilled crew.
And Captain Reed was an experienced master, deeply respected by his men. February 13th was supposed to be the absolute pinnacle of his life.
He had just married a beautiful woman named Annette, or Annetta, depending on the archival source you look at.
Which brings us to the first major psychological red flag of this story. Captain Reed decides to combine his two great loves.
His new wife and his ship.
Yeah. He turns this voyage into a celebratory wedding cruise bound for Portugal. The entire crew is invited. Everyone is celebrating.
The atmosphere is supposedly jubilant.
But, from a historical perspective, bringing a bride on a working 18th century ship is like bringing a civilian into a military trench.
It completely short-circuits the chain of command.
Right, and the survival-first psychology of the crew, it's just this massive display of maritime hubris.
It is an astonishing temptation of fate. We have to view this through the psychological framework of the 18th century sailor. They operated in an incredibly lethal environment.
Where they had very little control over their own survival.
Exactly. To cope with that immense anxiety, maritime culture developed these rigid superstitions. These weren't just silly folktales.
They were psychological defense mechanisms.
Yes, they believed in omens and unspoken rules that you simply did not break. And the most deeply ingrained taboo of that era was bringing a woman aboard a working vessel.
And that stems from the animism inherent in sailing culture, doesn't it? Like, the ship itself is traditionally referred to as a she.
That animism is totally central to the mindset. The lore dictated that the sea or the spirit of the ship herself would become intensely jealous of a human woman.
Especially one monopolizing the captain's attention.
Right. But there is also a deeply practical sociological mechanism at play here. A ship is a hypermasculine, enclosed, high-stress environment.
So introducing a woman, especially the captain's new bride, disrupts everything.
It completely shatters the established sociosexual hierarchy. It causes distraction, invites rivalries, and ruins the intense discipline required to keep a wooden ship afloat.
For a seasoned captain like Simon Reed to ignore this golden rule reveals a man utterly blinded by love.
He really believed his personal joy could overpower the ancient, unforgiving laws of the ocean.
He practically dared the universe to strike him down. And the tragedy is that the universe didn't even need to summon a rogue wave to do it.
No, it just used a man already on board.
Right. We have to introduce the antagonist of this historical nightmare, the first mate, John Rivers.
John Rivers occupies a very specific, intimate role in this disaster. He is not just a deckhand.
He's the second in command.
Exactly. Responsible for the day-to-day discipline of the crew. Furthermore, he served as Captain Reed's best man at the wedding.
Wow. So he's supposed to be the captain's right hand and most trusted confidant.
But Rivers is harboring this toxic, all-consuming secret. He is hopelessly in love with Annette.
The psychological torture of that scenario is just profound. Picture standing at the altar, holding the rings, forcing a smile.
Playing the role of the supportive best man.
Yeah, all while watching the woman you were obsessed with bind herself for life to your commanding officer.
It is the perfect incubator for a psychotic break. And the archival sources detail how Rivers processes this trauma. He doesn't stoically accept it.
The jealousy metastasizes, right?
It does. On the night of the wedding, while the rest of the party is celebrating the union, Rivers isolates himself in the shadows. He spends the entire night drinking heavily.
So he allows this toxic cocktail of alcohol, unrequited love, and intense humiliation to fester.
The sources describe him swearing revenge in the dark.
Which brings us to the morning of the voyage, February 13th. The ship is at the quay, preparing to depart for Portugal. The guests are boarding.
The crew is stowing cargo and readying the rigging. The atmosphere is joyous and chaotic.
And amidst all this, you have Rivers. He is severely hungover, physically exhausted, and his mind is completely poisoned.
The contemporary descriptions of him that morning are chilling. They say he watched the newlyweds with a petrified expression.
The word petrified is so crucial there. He isn't weeping. He isn't throwing a tantrum.
He is frozen. Clinically speaking, we are looking at a man experiencing extreme cognitive dissonance.
So his rational empathy just shut down.
To protect his ego from the pain of rejection, yes. It leaves only a cold, rigid fixation.
The details of his behavior get even more disturbing. He physically cannot tolerate the sensory input of their happiness.
He actually covers his ears with his hands.
Literally standing on the deck, trying to physically block out the sounds of their cheerful voices.
He is attempting to shut out the reality of the woman he loves being happy with the man who took her.
If we contextualize this within the physical reality of a ship, we hit the core of the horror.
Isolation-induced psychosis. A 1700s schooner is a remarkably confined space.
On land, if you suffer a heartbreak, you can just, move away. You can avoid the person.
You can allow physical distance to facilitate emotional healing. But on a ship, there is nowhere to run.
You are trapped in a floating wooden cage. Every time Rivers turns a corner, he's going to see them.
He will hear them through the thin wooden bulkheads of the captain's quarters. He'll have to take daily, direct orders from his most hated rival.
The physical environment of the ship acts as a pressure cooker, just accelerating his descent into this localized, violent madness.
So the stage is set with unbearable tension. We have a captain blinded by his own happiness.
A crew completely oblivious to the threat in their ranks.
And a first mate who is quietly, violently unraveling. Let's reconstruct exactly how this doomed voyage unfolded, minute by agonizing minute.
Okay, so initially, protocol holds. Right. Captain Reed takes the helm himself.
which is standard procedure for navigating a vessel out of a harbor. He steers the Lady Lovibond through the tricky coastal waters.
He gets them safely out into the open sea, performing his duties as a master mariner.
But once they hit open water, he makes a fatal miscalculation of risk.
He decides the ship is safe, the course is set, and his presence is no longer immediately required on deck.
Right. He hands the heavy wooden wheel over to the helmsman, turns his back on the sea, and goes below deck.
To rejoin Annette and the wedding guests, the narrative pacing just completely shifts here. The captain descends, and the sounds of the celebration below deck swell.
But up on the main deck, it becomes stark and isolated. It's just the helmsman standing at the wheel.
His eyes are locked on the compass binnacle, focused entirely on keeping the ship on her heading.
And somewhere in the shadows of the rigging, John Rivers is watching.
The environmental conditions begin to deteriorate rapidly, too. The sources mention a heavy winter rain beginning to fall.
So you have the sound of icy rain drumming against the wooden deck, the wind howling through the canvas sails.
And the rhythmic rushing sound of the bow cutting through the swells. It's basically sensory deprivation for the helmsman.
He is visually focused forward into the dark and auditorily overwhelmed by the storm. He has absolutely no idea that the lethal threat isn't out in the water.
It is standing right behind him.
We don't have access to Rivers' internal monologue in that moment. We don't know if he meticulously planned this execution for hours.
Or if, like, the muffled sound of a specific laugh wafting up through the deckboards triggered an impulsive snap.
Regardless, he makes his move with terrifying finality.
He steps over to the ship's rail and pulls out a belaying pin. Now, for context, a belaying pin isn't just a stick.
No, it is a solid piece of turned oak or iron.
Usually about 18 inches long, shaped remarkably like a short baseball bat. Its intended purpose is to be slotted into the rail so sailors can secure heavy rigging lines around it.
Under immense tension, so it has to be incredibly dense and heavy.
In the hands of a desperate, enraged man, it is a blunt force execution weapon.
Rivers draws this heavy pin from the rail. He walks softly up behind the unsuspecting helmsman.
And the driving rain and the wind completely mask the sound of his boots on the wet deck planks.
The helmsman's attention remains fixed on the horizon and the compass.
The physiological reality of the strike is devastating. The historical narrative describes a single crushing blow to the head.
Aimed at the occipital lobe at the back of the skull. A heavy wooden or iron pin swung with full force would cause massive, instantaneous neurological trauma.
The helmsman is felled instantly. He drops to the deck, completely incapacitated.
Without ever having the chance to turn around or raise a hand in defense, it is a cowardly, vicious attack.
Highly efficient, though. In a matter of seconds, the Lady Lovibond is entirely under the control of a psychotic individual.
Rivers steps over the unconscious or dead body of his crewmate, and he takes the wheel in his hands.
He is no longer just a jealous lover. He is the undisputed master of the ship's destiny.
And his next action is deliberate and calculated. He doesn't just let the ship drift.
No, he purposefully alters the course, steering the speeding schooner directly toward the Goodwin Sands.
We need to pause and examine the Goodwin Sands because understanding the hydrodynamics of this specific environment is crucial.
It really is. The Goodwin Sands isn't just some shallow patch of water where a ship might gently get stuck and wait for the tide.
It is a 10-mile-long sandbank in the English Channel off the coast of Kent. It is widely considered one of the most lethal maritime environments on Earth.
A veritable ship graveyard.
It is a geological nightmare. At high tide, the sands are completely obscured beneath the waves, rendering them invisible to the eye.
But it's the composition of the sand itself that makes it so deadly, right?
Exactly. Because of the conflicting tidal currents where the English Channel meets the North Sea, the sand is in a constant state of liquefaction when submerged.
It acts as a non-Newtonian fluid.
Yes. So if a massive, heavy wooden ship sails into it, the hull doesn't just scrape the bottom. The momentum drives the ship deep into this semi-liquid sand.
And the sand immediately swallows the lower hull.
And when the tide goes out, that liquefied sand drains of water and locks together like solid concrete around the bottom of the ship.
The ship becomes immovably trapped. But it gets worse, doesn't it?
It does. As the tide recedes further, the water level drops, leaving the heavy bow and stern of the ship hanging unsupported in the air.
While the middle is encased in this concrete-like sand, the sheer gravitational weight of the unsupported ends causes the wooden hull to literally break its own back.
The ship snaps in half under its own weight.
It is an absolute death sentence.
Mm-hmm.
And Rivers, being an experienced first mate, knew exactly the physics of what he was doing.
He knew the Goodwin Sands would obliterate the Lady Lovibond.
So hold the cinematic horror of this moment in your mind. You have this sleek schooner racing blindly through a freezing winter rainstorm.
Plunging through the ocean swells, aimed like a torpedo at an invisible wall of liquefied sand.
And below deck, the passengers laughing. They are toasting to a long, happy life.
They exist in a warm, insulated bubble of joy.
Completely unaware that their executioner's at the wheel, and they have seconds left to live.
The speed at which their reality shifts is sickening. The impact wouldn't be a gentle grounding. It would be a catastrophic deceleration.
The terrible, deafening roar of the crash as the ship hits the sands of speed would sound like an explosion.
The sources explicitly state that the hull violently ripped open on the port side.
The entire ship, this massive, complex wooden structure, just tipped violently onto its side, snapping the mainmast like a dry twig.
The sheer speed of the tragedy is difficult to fathom. 1 second, you're holding a glass of wine, smiling at the bride.
And the next second, the floor drops vertically, the wooden walls tear open to the sea, and freezing, churning ocean water is rushing in.
Drowning you in the dark. There was zero time to react, let alone organize an evacuation.
The passengers were trapped in a dark, rapidly flooding wooden box that was aggressively tearing itself apart under the tidal forces.
The historical accounts emphasize that the schooner sank incredibly quickly. It was a chaotic, violent, and agonizing end.
The passengers and crew were either drowned in the dark of the lower decks, washed overboard into the freezing channel, or crushed in the splintering wreckage.
Every single person on board perished. Captain Reed, Annette, the crew, the musicians, the guests.
All eradicated because of the toxic obsession of one man. And the eerie aftermath of the disaster is just as unsettling as the wreck itself.
In the days that followed, the ocean began to return fragments of the violence.
The flood tide supposedly washed up scattered debris and personal items onto the nearby Kent shores.
They found flotsam, cargo, and chillingly, the legend states that the body of John Rivers himself eventually washed up on the beach.
But this is the exact moment where the historical narrative takes a sharp turn into the supernatural.
Yeah. Right, because while bodies and small debris washed ashore, not a single identifiable structural piece of the Lady Lovibond's hull remained on the Goodwin Sands.
The ship simply vanished. It struck the sands, broke apart, drowned its passengers, and then the sands swallowed the wreckage whole.
It's as if the ocean deliberately erased the crime scene, leaving no physical evidence that the beautiful schooner had ever existed.
In the standard annals of maritime history, that would be the conclusion, wouldn't it? A tragic wreck, a mass murder fueled by jealousy.
A terrible loss of life slowly fading into obscurity, but the psychological imprint of the Lady Lovibond refused to stay buried in the sand.
Because according to the legend, the ship wasn't merely destroyed. It was cursed to eternally repeat its final, terrifying moments.
This shifts our investigation to the 50-year curse and the phantom sightings.
Let's move forward exactly half a century to February 13, 1798.
50 years have passed. The geopolitical landscape has shifted, and we find a man named Captain James Westlake.
He's commanding the Edenbridge, right?
Yes, a Coast Guard ship patrolling those exact same treacherous waters off the Kent coast.
The role of a Coast Guard captain in 1798 is important context here. He's a pragmatic, hardened sailor looking for smugglers or ships in genuine distress.
He certainly isn't looking for ghosts. Yet, out of the freezing darkness, Westlake reports an incredibly close call.
His ship nearly collides head-on with a three-masted schooner.
But what elevates this from a near miss into pure horror is the auditory hallucination he experiences.
As the unidentified schooner passes agonizingly close to the Edenbridge, Westlake doesn't hear the frantic shouts of a crew trying to avoid a collision.
He doesn't hear the creaking of rigging in panic. Instead, drifting across the freezing black water, he clearly hears the sounds of a celebration.
Music, voices laughing, the clinking of glasses, echoing from the deck of this phantom ship as it glides past them.
Imagine the psychological shock of that. You are a seasoned Coast Guard captain expecting to curse out a careless navigator.
And instead, you are assaulted by the sounds of a ghost wedding party.
It completely defies logic and sensory expectation. And Westlake wasn't an isolated witness experiencing a momentary delusion.
A nearby fishing smack, a smaller working sailing vessel, also observed this unknown schooner.
The fishermen saw the vessel heading on a direct, highly dangerous course straight for the Goodwin Sands.
Seeing a ship off course and in imminent peril, these fishermen reacted as mariners do. They altered their own course to try and intercept it.
To offer rescue or wave them off the sands, but as the fishing smack closes in to help, the schooner just dissolves.
It vanishes into thin air.
There is no crash against the sands, no splintering wood, no screams in the dark, just empty, churning water.
That sudden, impossible disappearance is the defining characteristic of maritime spectral lore.
And this event establishes the grim pattern. The Lady Lovibond is bound to a very specific temporal loop.
Every 50 years, precisely on February 13th, the ship and its murdered crew are condemned to reenact their final doomed voyage.
Which brings us to the next cycle, 1848. Another 50 years pass.
And the sighting in 1848 is, to me, the most psychologically devastating because of the intense physical and emotional cost exacted from the witnesses.
The ship appears again off the coast, but this time it looks so incredibly real, so physically tangible.
That the local seamen from the fishing community of Deal, about 13 kilometers northeast of Dover, are completely convinced that a catastrophic shipwreck is unfolding right in front of their eyes.
To appreciate the gravity of this, we have to look at the culture of these local fishing communities. Deal was famous for its boatmen.
When a ship was in distress on the Goodwin Sands, these men did not wait for official Navy help. They launched their own open lifeboats.
I want to really dig into the horrific reality of what launching a lifeboat meant in 1848.
It's not a quick sprint in a motorized Coast Guard cutter with a heated cabin.
No, these men are leaving their warm homes in the middle of a freezing February night. They're kissing their wives and children goodbye, fully aware they might drown.
They are dragging heavy wooden rowboats into the crashing surf, fighting freezing winds and massive, violent ocean swells.
They are risking severe hypothermia, physical exhaustion, and death, rowing out into the pitch-black ocean toward what they believe are screaming, dying people.
It is an act of supreme, selfless courage. They are voluntarily putting their own lives on the line to save strangers.
They row out into the dark, navigating the treacherous, shifting currents around the sands, pulling with burning muscles toward the exact spot where they saw the schooner go down.
And what do they find when they arrive at the coordinates? Empty water. Absolutely nothing.
No floating debris, no survivors clinging to shattered masts, no bodies bobbing in the waves.
Just the freezing, uncaring ocean. Imagine the psychological terror and the mind-bending confusion of that moment.
You've just risked your life. You are freezing. Your adrenaline is peaking as you prepare to pull drowned bodies from the water.
And you slowly realize you have been chasing a phantom.
It is a profound violation of their reality. The ocean actively tricked them. It weaponized their own bravery and empathy against them.
They had to row back to shore with the chilling realization that the sea had manifested an illusion so physically convincing it commanded them to risk their lives.
The terrifying pattern holds firm, though. We move forward to 1898, another 50 years on the dot.
The schooner reappears, sails its doomed course toward the sands, and vanishes. It reinforces the legend, calcifying it into an undeniable local fact.
In the communities along the Kent coast, everyone knows that on February 13th, every 50 years, you watch the horizon.
Which brings us into the modern era, to the sighting of 1948. This account introduces a specific, chilling detail.
A mariner named Captain Bull Prestwick claims to have witnessed the cursed ship. He reports that the vessel looked entirely real and solid, with one major unnatural exception.
He states the phantom ship emitted an eerie white glow.
An eerie white glow. That is the quintessential hallmark of a ghost ship.
It's as if the vessel is radioactive with its own cursed energy, or perhaps bathed in a perpetual spectral moonlight.
We could speculate about atmospheric phenomena like ionized air or St. Elmo's fire, but what makes the 1948 sighting truly unsettling is a real-world parallel.
This happens almost simultaneously, right?
Right around the exact time the glowing ghost ship is allegedly sighted, a real physical ship runs aground and is destroyed on the exact same Goodwin Sands.
An Italian cargo vessel named the Silvia Onorata. That is a staggering coincidence. It's a tragic echo.
It makes it seem as though the appearance of the Lady Lovibond is a harbinger of actual doom.
The ghost ship sails past, and its spectral wake drags a real ship down into the sands. It completely blurs the line between supernatural folklore and the ongoing lethality of that environment.
Which is a perfect transition into our next area of focus. To understand why this specific story has such immense staying power, we have to look past the human actors and look at the stage itself.
The environment is arguably the main character in this horror story. We need to treat the Goodwin Sands not just as a geographical hazard, but as a malevolent, hungry entity.
The lore surrounding the Goodwin Sands is ancient, and it's drenched in myth, blood, and geological violence.
According to persistent local legend, these incredibly dangerous sandbanks are not just natural shoals, are they?
No, they are supposedly the drowned remains of a legendary fertile island called Lomea.
Lamea sounds like an English Atlantis.
The parallels are striking. The historical myth suggests that Lomea was a prosperous, inhabited island that was swallowed whole by the sea during a catastrophic storm in the year 1099.
The ocean allegedly rose up, devoured the landmass, drowned its inhabitants, and reduced a thriving community to a submerged, shifting death trap.
So instead of sinking gracefully into myth, it turned into a weaponized environment. The archival sources even note that centuries prior, the Romans famously referred to the specific area as the Island of Hell.
When an empire as expansive and pragmatic as Rome looks at a patch of water and officially designates it the Island of Hell, you know you're dealing with a place of profound danger.
The Goodwin Sands are not static. The immense tidal forces constantly move the sand.
A channel that is safe to navigate one week might become a deadly hidden shoal the next. It is an environment that actively and continually deceives navigators.
And because of that constant deception and lethality, the Lady Lovibond is definitely not alone out there.
The Goodwin Sands act as a supernatural nexus. They are a hunting ground, crowded with the memories of other phantom vessels.
The source material lists several other cursed ships that share these exact same haunted waters. This is not an isolated haunting.
Let's examine that list because it paints a vivid picture of how saturated this specific area is with historical trauma. First, you have the Northumberland.
This was a ship that sank violently on November 25th, 1703, and following a chillingly similar pattern to the Luvibond, it allegedly reappeared as a phantom exactly 50 years later in 1753.
Then you have the steamship Violet, a completely different era of maritime technology, utilizing steam instead of sail, but meeting the exact same fate.
She sank in 1857 and made a ghostly reappearance decades later on January 1st, 1947.
There is also the massive passenger liner, the SS Montrose. She disappeared without a trace in 1914, completely swallowed by the sea.
Only to be sighted cruising the waves as a silent phantom half a century later in 1965. And finally, there are reports of a ghostly man of war, the Shrewsbury.
What this compilation of sightings tells us is that the local maritime culture views the Goodwin Sands as a place where time and physics are fundamentally broken.
It's a place where extreme trauma becomes trapped. The prevailing theory among those who believe the folklore is a sort of environmental memory.
When a ship dies violently on the sands, the intense emotional and physical energy of that event is somehow absorbed by the environment.
And the ocean occasionally regurgitates that memory back into the physical world.
It's like a haunted house, but one that is constantly shifting its floor plan, hiding its traps under the water, swallowing its victims whole.
And then occasionally spitting out their holograms to terrify the living. It's a highly potent metaphor for the unforgiving nature of the sea.
But as investigative documentarians, we cannot just marvel at the spooky metaphors.
Right.
We have to introduce a massive, jarring twist to this entire narrative.
We have to pivot from folklore to forensics. We have to look at the documentary evidence.
This brings us to the investigative twist, myth, madness, and missing records. We've established the relentless 50-year pattern, 1798, 1848, 1898, 1948.
The logical next step, the moment everyone in the paranormal and maritime history communities was waiting for with bated breath, was 1998.
February 13th, 1998, people were actively watching. The Coast Guard, local historians, paranormal enthusiasts.
They were scanning the horizon for the eerie white glow. They were listening for the phantom violins over the waves.
Absolutely nothing happened. The night came and went. The waters remained dark and empty.
There was no sighting reported in 1998. The 250-year cycle was abruptly broken.
So the immediate suspenseful question is why? Did the curse finally lift? Did the tortured soul of John Rivers finally find peace?
Or did the ocean finally digest the Lady Lovibond completely? The answer is far more mundane, and in the context of historical research, far more shocking.
We need to look at the work of two historical researchers, George B. He and Michael Goss. They decided to bypass the folklore, roll up their sleeves, and look for the cold, hard paper trail.
And what they found, or rather the massive void they discovered, is the biggest twist of the entire deep dive.
There is a shocking, absolute lack of primary sources to support any aspect of this story.
When a ship sinks, especially a privately owned merchant schooner in the 18th century, It does not happen in a bureaucratic vacuum. It leaves a massive paper trail.
There are marine insurance claims, cargo manifests, public inquiries by naval authorities, obituaries for the mourning families.
But Behe and Goss discovered that there is no official record of a ship named Lady Lovibond sinking in 1748.
I want to clarify how impossible that is by explaining how marine reporting worked back then. The researchers looked at Lloyd's List.
Lloyd's List isn't just some casual local newsletter. It originated in Edward Lloyd's coffee house in London, which was the absolute epicenter of global marine insurance.
It has been published continuously since 1734. If you sailed a ship, if you insured a cargo, if a vessel went down anywhere near the British Isles, it was rigorously documented in Lloyd's List.
Because massive amounts of money were on the line. It was the definitive, undisputed Bible of maritime commerce.
For a catastrophic tragedy, a captain intentionally running a wedding ship aground on the most famous hazard in England to be completely omitted from Lloyd's List is practically impossible.
Furthermore, there is no entry for the ship in Lloyd's Register, which is the official British classification society for seagoing vessels.
The ship officially did not exist. There is no architectural description of the schooner anywhere on record.
There is no recorded starting point in England for this supposed voyage to Portugal. The dates, the names, the ship, the tragedy. Officially, historically, it is a complete void.
Which led researchers Behe and Goss to a definitive and sobering conclusion. The entire legend of the Lady Lovibond is almost certainly a complete 100% fabrication.
A fake, a story spun out of whole cloth. But if there is no historical baseline, where did the story actually originate?
Behe and Goss painstakingly traced the story back through the archives, searching for the very first time the Lady Lovibond was ever mentioned in print.
They didn't find it in a dusty, leather-bound 18th century naval journal. The very first mention of this story appeared in an article in the Daily Chronicle newspaper.
In the year 1924. 1924. The first time anyone wrote down the story of a 1748 shipwreck was 176 years after it supposedly happened.
Precisely. If you deconstruct the narrative elements, it becomes obvious. You have a handsome, naive captain, a beautiful young bride.
A tragically jealous best man, a violent murder, a ghost ship.
And a curse that operates on a neat mathematical 50-year loop. Is perfectly structured commercial melodrama.
And look at the date of the supposed disaster, February 13th, the day right before Valentine's Day.
That is the linchpin of the researchers' theory. They hypothesized that a journalist in 1924, facing a slow news week in mid-February, specifically engineered this entire tragedy.
To be published as a dark, entertaining Valentine's Day ghost story for the readers of the Daily Chronicle, it was classic yellow journalism.
They essentially synthesized all the best tropes of maritime folklore into one highly marketable article. They used a jealous lover for the dark romance angle,
A ghost ship for the supernatural thrill, and tied it to the eve of Valentine's Day to sell papers.
The researchers even suggest the journalist might have been vaguely inspired by seeing a real, older-looking ship cruising the misty channel in the 1920s and simply built a lucrative myth around it.
We also have to consider the psychological state of the public in 1924. This is the post-World War I era.
Society was dealing with the mass, senseless slaughter of the Great War, where death was chaotic and completely devoid of narrative meaning.
The public was hungry for predictable tragedies. A ghost story where a curse follows clear rules returning exactly every 50 years because of a specific crime of passion is actually very comforting.
It's an ordered narrative of grief compared to the chaos of the Somme. The journalist was filling a psychological void for his readers.
My initial reaction to this revelation is a mix of awe at the power of media and a deep sense of betrayal. The visceral terror I felt imagining being trapped in that flooding hull.
The genuine anger you felt toward John Rivers?
Yeah, it was all manufactured. I was emotionally manipulated by a hack writer from the 1920s.
It is the ultimate trick of a masterful storyteller. They can induce genuine physiological and emotional responses to completely fictional phantoms.
But wait, this revelation actually creates a secondary, much more complex mystery that we need to unravel. If the story was entirely invented in 1924, how do we explain the sighting in 1848?
Ah, right. The archival sources explicitly state that in 1848, local seamen from Deal launched lifeboats to rescue the Lady Lovibond.
If the ship didn't exist in the public consciousness until 1924, why were men risking their lives for it 76 years earlier?
That is the critical knot to untangle. There are two primary ways to analyze this. The first involves a phenomenon known in mysticism as a tulpa.
A thought form, right. An entity or an event that is literally brought into physical reality simply through the sheer power of collective belief and mental concentration.
Yes. If enough sailors believe the Goodwin Sands are haunted, do their minds project an illusion onto the fog? Did the sheer expectation of disaster make the phantom real enough to row out to?
Like a mass psychogenic hallucination caused by the extreme stress of their environment. But how could they have a tulpa of a ship they didn't know the story of yet?
Which leads to the more historically grounded forensic explanation. It is highly likely that the brave men of Deal did launch their lifeboats into a winter storm in 1848.
They likely rowed out to a real ship in distress, or perhaps a highly convincing mirage caused by atmospheric refraction.
And the identity of that real 1848 incident was lost to time. Decades later, the 1924 journalist is digging through local archives for a story.
He finds a vague record stating, Deal lifeboats launched for unknown vessel on February 13, 1848.
And decides to retroactively inject his fictional Lady Lovibond narrative into that real historical event to give his article fake credibility.
Wow, so he hijacked real bravery to sell a fake ghost. The truth is buried under layers of media manipulation, but the sheer power of the resulting story remains undeniable.
Even knowing it is likely a complete 1920s fabrication, the story survives. We are still dedicating a deep dive to it today, a full century after that newspaper article was published.
Why does this specific fake story endure so stubbornly?
Because it is flawlessly calibrated to exploit our primal fears. It isn't just a story about a bad storm. We can rationalize nature. Nature is random and impersonal.
What we struggle to process is human malevolence.
The intimate betrayal of a trusted friend, the horror of isolation at sea, knowing you are utterly cut off from rescue.
The jarring suddenness of death, transitioning from a warm, joyous wedding party to freezing, crushing water in a matter of seconds.
And perhaps the most existentially terrifying concept of all, the idea of being trapped in a loop.
The true curse of the Lady Lovibond narrative is that the victims don't just die once.
They are forced to relive the terror, the betrayal, and the drowning over and over again every 50 years, denied the peace of oblivion. It is pure existential horror.
It is incredibly poetic in a very dark, gothic way. And that poetic darkness has actually given the Lady Lovibond a fascinating second life in modern culture.
Yes, there's a really interesting connection from our research materials regarding that.
It comes from the Bamboo Sewing Machines blog, which did an extensive dive into alternative fashion aesthetics. The fabricated legend of the Lady Lovibond has become a massive source of inspiration for the steampunk community.
That is a brilliant example of cultural evolution. A fake 18th century ghost created in the 1920s, inspiring 21st century art.
It makes perfect sense when you analyze what steampunk is. It is the fusion of Victorian aesthetics, steam-powered or clockwork technology, and a gritty, romanticized view of history.
It relies heavily on brass, leather, corsets, goggles, and nautically inspired myths.
A cursed ghost ship from the 1700s provides a perfect, ready-made narrative backbone for that specific fashion aesthetic.
The source points out that there is something deeply romantic and inherently unsettling about a ship trapped in time.
A vessel caught endlessly between love and loss, suspended between the sea and the sky. For steampunk creators, writers, and costume designers, the Lady Lovibond is the ultimate muse.
It allows them to blend the delicate elegance of an 18th century wedding dress with the macabre decay of a shipwreck. It adds a whiff of the spectral to their storytelling.
It proves how a narrative, even a completely fabricated one, can jump from a 1924 newspaper column, evolve into a localized maritime legend, and eventually inspire art, fashion, and podcast deep dives a century later.
It speaks to the fundamental human need to romanticize the terrifying unknown. We don't just want a dark, lethal ocean. We want the ocean to possess a narrative.
We want the ghosts to have a backstory of tragic love and bitter betrayal, because assigning human emotions to the ocean makes the vast, uncaring sea feel a little more comprehensible.
And a little more tragic. As we pull back from this deep dive into the abyss, let's look at the incredible journey we've taken.
We started with a terrifying, blood-soaked betrayal on the rain-slicked deck of a beautiful schooner. We felt the suffocating claustrophobia of a doomed wedding party plunging into the sands.
We tracked the eerie, impossible sightings through the 19th and 20th centuries, agonizing over the brave men who rowed out to rescue phantoms.
And finally, we crashed into the cold, hard reality of a 1924 newspaper fabrication. We dissected the myth, exposed the glaring absence of historical records, and laid bare the storytelling mechanics.
We proved as conclusively as history allows that the Lady Lovibond likely never sailed, Annette was never married, and John Rivers never swung that lethal belaying pin.
But I want to leave you with one final chilling thought to mull over. Something that builds on the environmental evidence we've explored today.
What is that?
We know the 1924 journalists likely invented the names, the wedding, and the specific murder plot. But what about the sightings themselves?
How do you mean?
If the Lady Lovibond was purely a journalist's invention in 1924, what exactly did Captain Westlake and the Coast Guard hear echoing over the freezing water in 1798?
What did those brave, exhausted men from Deal actually see when they launched their lifeboats into the deadly surf in 1848?
And what was the source of that eerie white glow that Captain Prestwick saw in 1948, right at the exact moment a real Italian cargo ship was being violently torn apart on those same sands?
That is the lingering, unanswerable question. The Goodwin Sands is a very real, very lethal graveyard.
It holds the shattered remains of hundreds of actual ships and the bones of thousands of actual corpses. The ocean out there is saturated with real historical trauma.
So maybe the 1924 journalist didn't invent a ghost out of thin air. Maybe he just gave a romantic name to a presence that was already there.
If the Lady Lovibond wasn't real, perhaps the ocean just borrowed her name, borrowed the tragic story of the doomed wedding, as a way to show us the very real ghosts it has been hiding for centuries down in the dark, shifting sands of the island of hell.
The sea doesn't need our fabricated stories to be haunted. It has consumed more than enough lies to generate its own.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep questioning the legends, but if you ever find yourself looking out over the Kent coast on a freezing February night, well, perhaps it's best to stay on dry land.